degrees in some places, even a bit of snow up over the tops of the Pennines. And that heavy rain is going to stick around, we think, across these parts of the world for much of the weekend, which is of some concern. In actual fact, the area of wet weather will tend to expand through the rest of the day to engulf other parts of northern England. There'll be a few showers elsewhere. The best of the sunshine probably across southern counties of England, parts of Northern Ireland, the far west of Scotland. In the sunshine, 17 or 18, but in the rain, 7 or 8. As we go into the night, again, that rain expands northern England, into the Midlands, much of Wales too, and pushing into Northern Ireland. This is the area where it's going to stay pretty wet throughout much of tomorrow. Again, brightest across the far south and western Scotland. Here's some sunshine, but for most, a pretty wet old weekend to come.
This is BBC News, the main headlines at 12 o'clock. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller, covering all of the events live here in Westminster, where the Prime Minister is trying to reassert his authority. Well, Gordon Brown is still reshuffling his cabinet. Alan Johnson becomes the new Home Secretary. Alistair Darling stays as Chancellor, while John Hutton steps down as Defence Secretary. Well, this is the scene live in Downing Street, where the Prime Minister is still putting together the rest of the cabinet team. I'll show you the pictures in a moment or so. And it is thought that Jack Straw is remaining as Justice Secretary. Lord Mandelson will also stay at the Business Department. Well, the reshuffle comes hours after James Purnell delivered a big blow to the Prime Minister's authority when he resigned and called on Gordon Brown to also quit. But Cabinet colleagues have criticised that action.
I have a different decision. I think that the voices that we need to listen to are the voices of people who depend on a strong and effective and progressive Labour government.
There's also pressure on Gordon Brown as the results from the local elections begin to come in. Labour losing out to the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. Well, a very good afternoon. As you can see, a little after midday, and what a morning it has been, because right throughout the course it has been dominated by one thing, that reshuffle that got underway very early this morning. Not perhaps the reshuffle that the Prime Minister would have planned, but one that was absolutely forced on him by last night's shock resignation of James Purnell. The crucial role of the Home Secretary will be filled by Alan Johnson, a man tipped as a possible new leader if Gordon Brown is forced out. Straight to the breaking news that will appear there on your screen in the next few moments, because John Denham is the new Communities Secretary. So that developing in the last few moments, replacing Hazel Blears. Of course, she went, and we all know how she went, but her replacement, that has just come in. John Denham is the new man in charge of Communities Secretary. And Alistair Darling, well, that was another of the key decisions that Gordon Brown had to make. There were all those reports suggesting that the Prime Minister wanted to move him, and other reports suggesting that he absolutely wasn't going to go to another job within Cabinet, would leave government if it came to that, but he stays in place in the neighbouring building at number 11. So that another of the crucial roles filled. The BBC also understands another of the big jobs. David Miliband will keep his job, his position as Foreign Secretary. Jack Straw, another of those ones that we have mentioned, who is not moving on. He carries on as Justice Secretary and has said this morning that Gordon Brown was the best man to lead the party. Let's just whiz round the other few things we know. Peter Mandelson is staying on as Business Secretary. He said that Labour would, quote, implode if the party didn't unite behind the Prime Minister. Well, let's go back to James Landale. He is monitoring all those events at Downing Street for us. James, just bring us right up to speed, first of all, with that John Denham news.
Yeah, confirmation now that John Denham has gone to replace Hazel Blears at the Communities Secretary. Crucial job that in terms of not just local government, but also in terms of the community side of the job. In terms of, ever since the war began in Iraq all those years ago, this job has been crucial in terms of trying to engage with British Muslim population and to try and make sure that extremism is countered and combated in a variety of ways. The strategies change over the years between panels, between the hard sell and the soft sell, but clearly that is a job that the Prime Minister believes that John Denham can do. John Denham he's quite liberal. He's a guy who can sell that kind of message, I think, effectively to those communities that he will be engaged in this particular job. There had been some speculation that he'd be going to health, but that is now being denied, that he is going to replace Hazel Blears. So the big question now is who gets health and who, of course, gets DWP, the work and pensions jobs which still remain open, which John Denham had also been tipped for.
It's interesting, James, when you listen to just that whole succession of ministers who've been out making comments and defending Gordon Brown. They keep talking about the big issues of the day, the recession, cleaning up the Houses of Parliament behind me, and those are the issues that Gordon Brown, they say, is focused upon. The big problem, though, is all of that has been drowned out by the political mayhem of the last few days, and you even have to look at the local election results and how they have been, again, pushed to the sidelines today.
Yeah, I mean, the local election results, it's a curious phenomenon, simply because the results now have been dribbled out over the day. Local authorities effectively said, look, why spend all the money of having counts in the middle of the night? It costs a lot of money in overtime. Let's just do it the day after. They think the electorates can probably wait a few hours until they know the results of those votes. So that's what's happened. And that means that the impact of the results, sort of, we've yet to see any kind of replacement or echo of what James Purnell was saying. At the moment, everybody seems to be falling into line. Here with this report of all the events so far today is my colleague Ross Hawkins.
Not by breaking ranks and not by imploding in the way that I'm afraid James's actions could possibly lead to.
I'm very sad that James Purnell has left the government. He's a good friend of mine. He has outstanding achievements to his credit as a minister, and he had big ideas for the future. And he's obviously a big and serious person, and I think it's a loss to the government. However, I don't share the judgment that he made.
Opposition politicians said this proved Britain needed a general election.
Good morning. Well, I think the events of the last 2 days show that this government has completely forfeited its right to govern. Anyone watching these events would just be asking what has happened to the authority of the government, what has happened to the authority of the Prime Minister.
James Purnell has left Gordon Brown's side, but in Downing Street they're hoping a reshuffle rather than another resignation will be enough to bolster the government. Ross Hawkins, BBC News, Westminster.
And one other piece of news I can give you is there's been a lot of speculation this morning that of what might happen to John Denham's former department, now Department of Universities, Skills and Innovations. That was a part of the...
OK, James, thanks. Once again, let's reflect on what we know in terms of the reshuffle, what we know in terms also of what has happened with those local election results, with the early counts through the night and more counting going on at the moment. I'm joined here on the green by John Healy, Sarah Tether and Liam Fox. Thanks you all for being here. John, to you first of all. I mean, the reshuffle is playing itself out, but isn't the problem for just about everyone watching all of this all around the country? Is a reshuffle all about saving Gordon Brown and his premiership, not the key issues of the day? And they are making their judgment on that, and their judgment is not good for your party.
No, the reshuffle's needed. The government will have some fresh face and a fresh direction. What's really needed beyond that is for Parliament, this Parliament, to sort out the expenses problem so that any new Parliament can start afresh, and the government to sort out and lead the country through the recession.
Sorry, you talk about fresh faces. Jackie Smith said she wanted to go months
That's what Gordon
ago.
Brown will do as soon as he
Hazel
finishes
Blears
his
was
reshuffle.
left hanging out to dry for days. Gordon Brown could have done this days and weeks ago if he wanted to bring in fresh faces. He waited until after the election results because he knew they would be bad, and he knew there was only one way to deflect attention from him, and that's by having a reshuffle. It's the oldest trick in the book.
No, each of the 4 ministers you've talked about have left for their own reasons and different reasons. There's only James Purnell who said that he thinks Gordon should step down, and I think he's wrong.
Devastating,
I don't think the Labour Party will follow him. I don't think the public will follow him. The public want to see the government sorting out the economy, and they want to see Parliament, this Parliament, sorting out the scandal of the expenses that has made them so angry.
You're closely involved in these local elections. Let me just read a few of the quotes from your former deputy leader, John Prescott. We've had a non-campaigning leadership, he says. He specifically mentions Harriet Harman, he mentions Douglas Alexander, he mentions others. He says they are resigned to defeat. This is beyond expenses, the message coming back from voters. Is that the right analysis?
No, he's wrong. He's wrong.
Another one who's wrong.
Well, he's wrong because I've been out campaigning for the last few weeks, as you'd expect. I'm local government minister, and the campaigns in the local areas have been very strong, but they've been overwhelmed. They've been overwhelmed by the reaction to the scandal of the parliamentary expenses, and they've also been undermined by the way that our national system treats local government elections as simply a referendum on the personalities and the political parties of Westminster, and that's wrong too.
Well, you say that as if it's true. I mean, that is to get into the minds of every single voter who has cast their votes in the last 24 hours. That's quite patronising, isn't it?
No, it's
say
not.
that
No,
they
it's not.
voted
No, it's
because
not.
they might have seen something on television or read something in the paper.
with
You don't
respect.
know how they voted or what they voted on.
Look, with respect, you're standing here outside Westminster here. I've been out around the country, as Liam Fox and Sarah Taylor will have been as well. And that's what people are saying. You're all the same. We don't like what you're doing. We're going to protest, and I have to say, you know, all the major parties in different ways, particularly in the Euro elections, will
Let me
see
bring
their
in
votes down.
Liam Fox, because you have made gains already through the course of the counting last night and this morning, but not the big gains that perhaps could have been expected. Why not?
Well, we don't know what levels of gains we're making. We're making big gains from Cumbria to Devon right at the moment, and some of those gains are really quite spectacular. We'll wait and see what the scale is. But this idea that voters had the audacity to vote on personality or the expenses, voters knew exactly what they're doing. They're casting a vote in local government elections because they know that Labour has failed. This idea that they say that you're all the same, how do you explain then why Labour is taking such a battering right across the country? It's very clear that the voters are sending out a clear signal. They are fed up with Labour. We've got a dysfunctional Prime Minister reshuffling a dysfunctional cabinet today at a time when what the public really want is a new mandate for Parliament and a general election.
You say new mandate, but again, it's one of those things that it's easy to say and almost try to assert as the truth. I mean, what...
Well, any new government that wins a general election has a new mandate.
Well, what the public seem to want are all of those issues that directly affect them sorted out. And that may be with the current Prime Minister, as long as he sorts them out, which is what they seem to want.
Well, up and down the country, where I've also been, people were complaining about the state of the economy. That was still the number one issue on the doorsteps. And they're very clear where the blame lies with that, and that lies with Gordon Brown, who wasn't a good Chancellor of the Exchequer and is not a good Prime Minister. They were complaining about problems with their local health service, with local education, the sort of bread and butter issues voters normally complain about. Yes, they were concerned about the expenses issue. They didn't regard that as a party issue. They regarded that as being across all parties. Labour are being punished because they are not a good government. Gordon Brown is being punished because he's not a good Prime Minister. What voters really wanted to see was a general election to get rid of them.
I'll come to Sarah in a moment. Just a final question to you, Liam Fox, which is, I mean, you were watching what is going on within the Labour Party and the government, like everybody else. I mean, one of the possibilities, of course, is that the Labour Party end up replacing, in the coming weeks, coming months, Gordon Brown with somebody else. Would that be slightly problematic for your party? You have again and again and again been talking about a general election. You could find yourself suddenly facing somebody new with a new mandate to go for another 12 months.
Well, first of all, I don't think that they're likely to replace Gordon Brown. I think the likelihood is that we'll have to stay and put up with the current government for some time yet. And that even if they did replace him with somebody, it's not someone so new that they can't that they can dissociate themselves from Labour's record. Labour's record will bring them down, and that's more important to voters than anything else.
Sarah Taylor, let me bring you in as promised. I mean, we've heard from Nick Clegg already, and again, just like David Cameron has been making the point again today that he's been making for weeks. Nick Clegg making the same point that he thinks this current government simply have run out of steam.
Yeah, I think they have. And I think the public have stopped listening to them. So, you know, they're catching the news today with a reshuffle. But all they're actually doing is promoting people who've into the spaces that other people have vacated. And it just really does look like shuffling the chairs on the Titanic. I think the public have completely stopped listening to anything that the Labour government have said. And at that point, I'm afraid, it's terminal for Gordon Brown and terminal for whoever they decide to replace him with. We've got to have an election. We can't have a situation where so many people in my constituency are losing their jobs, and yet the Labour government are only worried about keeping their own jobs. That's not sustainable. The public know there's nobody governing the country, and we've got to have a general election.
But if that doesn't happen?
Well, if it doesn't happen, we'll go on with this void, and the public will get more and more and more angry. And I think it's only going to get worse for Labour the longer they try and hang on, because it looks like self-interest. It looks like they've lost interest in the public, and the public have lost interest in them.
OK, well, Sarah, John and Liam, thank you very much for your time here in Westminster. We will analyse the local elections on the ground in a moment with Jeremy Vine. But let me just bring you a line that is coming to us. News that Scotland Yard, within the next few minutes, will give us an update on the ongoing investigation that they have been undertaking for the last few weeks regarding allowances and expenses. That is due to come in the next few minutes, and you can see there on the screen, highly unlikely there will be successful prosecutions. They were looking, you remember, at a handful of particular cases, and their statement there from Scotland Yard, highly unlikely there would be a successful prosecution. So that clearly is a development there on that story about expenses, where we are on that, and we will get more reaction on that in a moment or two. But I mentioned the local election results because counting continues and more of the picture is becoming clearer. So let's take an overview and see what we know thus far, and that's with Jeremy Vine.
Matthew, thank you. Yes, we are getting a bit more of the picture, counting today, of course, so it'll be a little while. But here's the map. It is just England, as I mentioned earlier, 34 councils, 27 of them, those county councils. And if we come up here, let me just tell you a couple of things that are going on. I focused earlier at the top left of the map, these 4 Labour councils, Lancashire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Staffordshire. Derbyshire, the strongest Labour hold there. So if they lose that council, they may well have lost all 4. If they lose all 4, imagine them having to say, well, you know, the Labour red has been wiped off this map entirely. It would be fairly disastrous for them. Now, so far, I can tell you Conservatives have gained 2 seats in Derbyshire. It's a 6-seat Labour majority there. In Staffordshire, the Conservatives are doing very well, gained 11 seats. So they're pushing Labour back in Staffordshire. It's been Labour since 1981. Significance at Westminster, 3 Labour MPs in that county. Burton, Stafford, Tamworth, sending Labour MPs back to Westminster. If we come down to the southwest here, we were mentioning Somerset earlier on and the fascinating Lib Dem Conservative tussle in Somerset. Well, what about Devon? There's a situation here. It's a Lib Dem council, that's why it's coloured orange. Conservative have gained, we think now, 3 seats, 2 from the Lib Dems and 1 from the Independents. Actually, no, 6 seats now gained in Devon for the Conservatives. They need 9 to take the council. That'll be a great fillip for them if they can actually make that kind of headway in the southwest of England. Right, if we look at the results that we've had in so far, as I say, precious few, but Bristol's significant. They counted last night. 3 Labour MPs in Bristol. If you're Doug Naismith in Bristol North West, you're probably starting to worry. That Labour MP, 2,700 majority, well, all 5 Labour councillors who stood for re-election in Doug Naismith's parliamentary seat lost their seats. Lincolnshire, Conservative up here, but it includes the city of Lincoln, which has sent a Labour MP to Westminster since Tony Blair's first victory in 1997. Gillian Merron is the Labour MP in Lincoln, 3,800 majority. 7 out of the 10 councillors in Lincoln City have gone from Labour to Conservative. And one more for you here. This is one of the new unitary councils. This is Central Bedfordshire. There are 5 new unitary councils where they concertina the functions of the council down. So it's Bedford, Central Bedfordshire, Cornwall, Shropshire, Wiltshire. Those are the new councils. Central Bedfordshire, well, we had it down as notionally blue. We expected it to be blue after today's counting, Conservative, but not a single Labour voter elected there. Now, some voting context. Let's go back, if we can, to the last general election, have a look at the graphs and see where Labour have travelled since then. Under Tony Blair in 2004-5, this was quite a tight result, but nevertheless a convincing 35% for Labour, puts them in as the governing party at Westminster, 32% for the Conservatives. But look at what happens after that third general election victory for Tony Blair. The Conservatives strengthen. Experts say 40% is about what they need in local elections to have the feeling that they're really going to take power at the next general election. These are local election results. Labour really weakening here, coming down. Boxing and coxing with the Lib Dems here, down to 24% at the local elections last year. So in third place behind the Lib Dems. Conservatives, a very handsome 44% last year. Now, there are questions for the Conservatives about whether they can sustain anything like that, given that they've taken a hit themselves in the expenses scandal. And also what we're hearing is Labour possibly tonight in the low 20s, so somewhere around where they were, with the Lib Dems possibly strengthened a little bit. But that's very, very early days. Counting taking place late here, isn't it? Usually we'd have it overnight. Now it's taking place during the day, so we're just getting it bit by bit, and we'll let you know every single piece of information as we get it.
Jeremy, thanks very much. Let's return straight away to what I was telling you about from Scotland Yard, that statement. I mentioned just one of the lines that they were saying it was highly unlikely there would be successful prosecutions, but a little more detail that I can give you, because they are also going on to say that a small number of allegations where the probity of claims are at issue, well, further investigations will be required. Let's talk more about this. Andy Ty is waiting to speak to me. And Andy, tell us more.
Yes, I've got the rest of that statement here, Matthew. As you say, as far as this panel is concerned, these experts who've been assessing whether or not there should be any kind of prosecution involving the Metropolitan Police, their view, unless evidence is available which shows individuals deliberately misled the Fees Office, it's highly unlikely there could be a successful prosecution. Many of the MPs complained about appear to have provided accurate information, they say, and therefore the Metropolitan Police will not pursue a criminal investigation into allegations against them. It goes on to say it's for the Commons and the Lords authorities to decide whether they wish to consider these matters further under their internal processes, and of course should further information come to light that indicates that either the Fees Office has been deliberately misled, then they will be able to make a referral back to the Metropolitan Police Service. So they're not closing all the avenues off, but they're saying in the light of the information that they have assessed so far, it looks unlikely that there should be further police investigations into most of the individuals referred to them. However, they do talk about a small number of allegations where questions remain, as you say, about the probity of the claims, which will require further information before any decisions regarding investigations could be made, and therefore they will continue to liaise with parliamentary officials. So that's that statement just in from the Metropolitan Police.
Andy Ty, thanks very much on that. Let's get back to all of the dramatic events here at Westminster, because we still have that reshuffle going on. It started very early this morning, and the very latest we are hearing suggestions that Yvette Cooper is heading to replace James Purnell as Work and Pension Secretary. We were hearing a little from her just a little earlier. She was obviously batting away any questions in that particular interview, but the very latest that the BBC is hearing that Yvette Cooper is the possible replacement for James Purnell at Work and Pensions. Let's speak about all of the extraordinary events that have been going on to Ben Brogan from the Telegraph, and thank you very much for being with us. Gosh, where to start? Let's start with the reshuffle, because it was fascinating listening to Nick Robinson earlier in the day. He was talking about how the big beasts were in place, and Gordon Brown had navigated that without any sort of big ricket, and used this phrase that would get him through the day, and it sort of stopped you in your tracks, really. The very fact that was what is at stake here.
It's a daily battle for survival for Gordon Brown, and that is, you're right, the word extraordinary applies here. I can't recall a situation like this. What seems to have happened is that the big beasts, the ones who really could decided overnight, once they discovered that James Purnell had jumped, that they weren't going to follow him, that they were going to rally around Gordon Brown. what was the price of that support? I suspect it may have been partly a guarantee that Alistair Darling would stay in place as Chancellor and not be moved, as some had hoped he would be. But it really suggests that Gordon Brown has now got around him the big beast of the cabinet. The question is, can he keep their support? And in particular, when we start getting the results of today's local elections, and particularly Sunday and Monday's European elections, might that change their minds?
Yeah, keep their nerve, I suppose. He has to continue that happens in the coming days, because I suppose this was supposed to happen after all of the bad news was out of the way today and Monday, but it's been sort of fast-forwarded, hasn't it? There's sort of no safety net after Monday's election results come.
There's none at all, and I think what we're really seeing is we're seeing a Prime Minister who's fighting day by day to survive, and the thing we need to get through this weekend is, will we have other resignations? Will junior ministers announce that they don't want to serve under Gordon Brown? And will that be enough to move him? This is showing that it's difficult to move a sitting Prime Minister.
You talked about the cabinet ministers and the big beast being in place. Siobhan McDonagh was talking earlier. She's obviously well known for her views and wanting a change, but was saying that she'd had conversations with cabinet ministers saying that they actually secretly wanted a change. I mean, should we take that at face value? Is that what is going on, that people are still perhaps making assessments and not telling us at all publicly? Or would you discount that?
Politics is a fairly dirty business, basically, and I think a lot of politicians, a lot of senior politicians, are making calculations every day, every minute, and they're working out that while they may wish Gordon Brown would go away and be replaced by somebody better, they also calculate that if he goes, Labour would have to call a general election, and a general election would be a catastrophe. So they're trying to put that off as long as they can.
So those are the cabinet ministers making that assessment. What about those individual backbenchers, all sorts of letters, emails, names, lists, all that sort of thing? Has that receded a little with this reshuffle, do you think, or may it still emerge through the weekend?
I think there's still several days of this to run, and certainly we haven't yet heard about these plotters, these backbenchers, this round-robin letter that is supposedly circulating. We haven't seen any numbers, we haven't seen any names, and it could be that if suddenly over the weekend you start getting long lists of MPs who've lost confidence in Gordon Brown and want him to go, that could change the dynamic. But I think for the moment, as long as he secures the support of the cabinet big beasts, today at least, he's secure, but that could change in hours.
It's almost extraordinary that we haven't even talked about the local election results. I know we're in the early stages of results coming in, but it has so been pushed to the sidelines with the main political story of the day. And I think in the next couple of moments we'll cross and join David Dimbleby for a special programme and actually learn more of those results. But in terms of that pressure, if Gordon Brown hangs on and survives, what chance of actual victory at the end of the day when they get to any sort of general election, given what we're seeing from these local election results and where we are?
Tomorrow is another day, and if the general election is next year, who knows what can change. But I think there is a danger for these politicians, for this Prime Minister, these ministers, that they may have lost sight of the fact that out there's an electorate that is very angry at the moment and that has delivered a very big verdict in the last 24 hours. And they have to have mind to that. And the appearance they're giving is of being concerned with saving their own skins and concerned solely with the internal machinations of the Labour Party. And that could come back to haunt them terribly whenever the general election is called.
And I suppose it's all been brought together with the expenses which you've been involved in so much. We were just breaking that development from Scotland Yard to talk about unlikely prosecutions, but there will be further investigations. It has had an extraordinary impact on that building there, and in terms of the political damage it has done.
There are a lot of MPs who tell me that they are concerned that the damage will continue to be felt for months and years to come. And what they're worried about is none of these ministers are showing any willingness to address that situation. Instead, what we are seeing is a rather unedifying battle inside the Labour Party to secure their own individual and collective survival.
The briefest of final thoughts, because things moving such a pace. When we get to the end of Monday and we've had the European election results, where do you think we're likely to be?
I think the balance of probability is marginally on the side of Gordon Brown surviving as Prime Minister, but that is only marginal. And what the last 48 hours have taught us is that things can change very suddenly and very quickly. But this is power politics, this is ministers' positioning, and there are still a number of voices that haven't been heard from. Backbenchers, junior ministers, we'll see in the next 24, 48 hours.
Ben Brogan, thanks very much. I mentioned a moment ago We are going to cross to a special programme with David Dimbleby from our election studios in just a moment or two to actually go into more of the analysis of course, that reshuffle, but also a look in some detail of those local election results that have come in. But it has been an extraordinary morning with that reshuffle taking place. Nick Robinson, I mentioned it a moment ago, was talking about getting through the day, that being at the forefront after that extraordinary resignation from James Purnell yesterday, that it was feared other cabinet ministers would follow. They haven't. But the reshuffle is still being put together. We still don't know what the backbenchers plan to do, but there it is. The clock is at 12:30, so let's take time to join David Dimbleby in the election studios.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC's election studio. This afternoon here we'll be reporting on those results from all the local elections that were held yesterday, not of course the Euros yet. But the local elections consisted of 27 county councils and 7 of those big unitary councils, as well as 3 mayors. And crucially, we'll be looking at the message this gives to the political parties. Once we've got enough wards in, we'll announce our projected national share of the vote, which we can do despite the fact only 45% of the English electorate and no one in the rest of the United Kingdom voted yesterday. But that's the magic of our psephology here in the studio. Politically, of course, this has been a weird morning. Things have been moving very fast. As everyone knows, the Prime Minister's original plans was to get these local election results, bad as they may be, out of the way, and then to reshuffle his government. But the resignation of 3 cabinet ministers, including James Purnell's last night, forced his hand. So we've had a new government being announced, dribs and drabs, through this morning. And just to remind you of the key points in that reshuffle, perhaps the most significant is that Alistair Darling stays, despite rumours that the Prime Minister wanted to get rid of him, as Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's thought he said, listen, I stay in this seat or I leave the government altogether. That would have been a devastating blow to the Prime Minister. Jack Straw, he stays as Justice Minister. Alan Johnson, who people have been suggesting is a more attractive potential leader of the party for the next general election. No signs of him going for the leadership at the moment. He takes over as Home Secretary, the post left by Jackie Smith. David Miliband, man who in the autumn last year made a half-hearted or failed anyway challenge for the leadership, and who said that James Purnell's challenge last night was a mistake. He stays on at the moment as Foreign Secretary. And Yvette Cooper, just been announced, will take over at Work and Pensions, which James Purnell had. This leaves a couple of places, still important ones. John Hutton resigned as Defence Secretary, and without any political side to it, saying he backed the Prime Minister, so that's open still. And of course the Health Secretary post, because Alan Johnson left, is still vacant. So those 2 may come through this afternoon. So now let's just have a look, though, at the important thing, which is the next stage in this whole political game, is what these council results are going to tell us. I said that only under half England and none of the rest of the United Kingdom is actually able to vote. But nevertheless, this is the next, what could be the next blow to the Labour government. This is what the backbenchers, who've seen insufficient resignations from the cabinet, who maybe hoped for more resignations so that they could mount a genuine challenge to Gordon Brown or force him out. This is what they'll now be looking to. This and the Euro elections on Sunday, which may show absolutely without peradventure that Labour's doing so badly that a change of leadership must take place. And then it'll be up to those backbenchers, because it's unlikely, needless to say, that anybody who's just accepted a job in the new government, let alone in the new cabinet, is suddenly going to scarper. Anyway, let's have a look at how these local elections are panning out now. The total number of councils we've had in so far: 3 Conservative, 2 Liberal Democrat, 1 Liberal Democrat, and no Labour. And the total number of councils, Hung is down 4, Liberal Democrats up 1. Down 1 and up 1. Sorry, my screens here aren't working at the moment, so I can't see these things. Total councillors. And now this is a crucial one, because the Tories are hoping to make big gains in number of actual councillors. Labour has about half the number up for grabs for the Conservatives tonight, but yesterday, but they're expecting that they might lose half, which would be bad for them. So it's the gains that matter. But anyway, this is the raw figures at the moment: 131, 52 for the Liberal Democrats, and this is the change. Conservatives up, Labour down by 23. So they've got to get to round about 200 or 250 if they succeed. Nick Robinson joins us now from Number 10. So, Nick, let's just go back to the main political business of the day while we wait for these results to come in. This isn't at all the reshuffle the Prime Minister wanted. The question is it a reshuffle that gives him a springboard for recovery between now and a general election?
The answer, I think, is no by his own lights, David. Only a few days ago, Gordon Brown was talking of a reshuffle that would, apparently in his phrase, be what he called a firebreak between the past and the future. One of the reasons he fell out so badly with Hazel Blears, who then stormed out of the cabinet, was that he was effectively saying to her, you are the past, you are associated with the damaging days of expenses scandal, I need to move forward. Now then, his advisers were saying to him, you regrettably do need a new Chancellor, not just because Alistair Darling's own expenses were in the headlines, but because the conclusion many around Mr Brown had reached was they needed a younger, more energetic politician who would take on the Conservatives at the election. They are not getting that. Alistair Darling made it absolutely plain there were only two choices in his mind: to stay on as Chancellor or to leave the Cabinet. Mr Brown, a weakened Mr Brown, in the face of this direct revolt, this assault on his leadership, has decided to keep Alistair Darling as Chancellor. And that really means, David, though there are some interesting shifts in the lower ranks of the Cabinet, that at the top this will look a government remarkably similar to the one that we were talking about a day or so ago. The key figures will be the same: the Chancellor, the Foreign Secretary, the Business Secretary. The three most powerful people really in the government will be the same. One big addition, of course, is the man who could have sought to replace Gordon Brown as leader is still the most likely successor if he goes. That is Alan Johnson as Home Secretary.
So how can things change now? Because the assumption was there might be very bad results, we don't know them yet, from yesterday's elections, and then he'd have a reshuffle and sort of grit his teeth and start again. Now he's had the reshuffle. Does it mean that it's all over to the backbenchers now? Because the people who've joined this new government or have stayed in post have shot their bolt, haven't they?
I think that's absolutely right. The attention now moves entirely to the backbenchers. Three cabinet ministers took crucial decisions in the last 48 hours, which have propped up Gordon Brown, for the moment at least. First, Alan Johnson rushing out after Hazel Blears' resignation, not only to defend Mr Brown, but actually to say that he'd be a better leader than he, Mr Johnson, would be. Then, late last night, David Miliband, who had only just been told by his friend James Pennell that he was resigning, he'd not been consulted about it, I'm clear about that from all the parties involved. He had a moment where he could have joined Mr Pennell. He didn't. He criticised him in public. He backed Gordon Brown. And then finally, John Hutton, very interesting this, a man who'd been highly critical of Gordon Brown before he became Prime Minister, a man who was very close to Tony Blair, resigning because he wants to give up politics, leaving the Cabinet, but not taking the opportunity to join in the fun, as it were, and say, well, frankly, I'm partly leaving because Gordon Brown is hopeless, endorsing his leadership. So each of these men have made it easier for the Prime Minister to survive. And the reason is quite clear. As one other cabinet minister put to me, they said, we face the choice at the moment between a slow but inevitable death at the next general election or instant death if we change our leader, have to have an instant election and then go down to defeat. So this is about raw calculation. Now, the question is, do backbenchers agree with that calculation? Many may say, why on earth should I put my head above the parapet, risk the flack that I will get if the guys who sit round the cabinet table haven't got the guts to do so? But you never know, David. There may be others who say, simply, this cannot go on. We will try and force it. Last thought for you. Even if that happens, though, Gordon Brown can still fight, and he could win.
He could win the general election, or he could remain at number 10?
No, my point was that even if there were a leadership contest, we tended to say, if there are 70 names, then there's a leadership contest, then he'd have to go. Well, he wouldn't have to go. He might look round the cabinet table, say to the country, say to his party, I've got the key people in the party behind me. I will fight this leadership contest.
Thanks very much, Nick. Let's join Jeremy Vine now. Have a look at the change that there's been so far. We've only had a few results in. The bulk of them will come through early afternoon. But let's see what we've had so far, Jeremy, can we?
We can, David. What we're looking at here is comparison of our key wards we've selected to just go through and look at the direction of travel for the parties. We're comparing with when those wards were last voted on in 2005. So here we go. And this shows a very dramatic drop for Labour here. 12% down. They're being hit and hit hard. 12% down on their voting last time. They would have had a bit of a buffer in there from 2005. That was a general election year, so more of their voters would have turned out to make sure they got back in at Westminster. But even so, down 12% is very bad for them. Conservatives up 3% here, up 3%. Early days with this data. And Lib Dems, as you can see, down 2% based on what we've seen so far. So it's impossible to take these figures, by the way, and add them to the voting figures and say, you know, Labour on X% nationally. It's too early for that. This is pretty raw data, but that's the direction of travel for the parties at the moment. Let's take a look at our map on the wall here. And as you've mentioned, it's English councils, 34 of them, 27 county councils, shire counties. That's why so much of the map is coloured blue. Interesting battle, though, in Devon, Lib Dem Devon. The Conservatives need 9 seats here. We're constantly looking for clues about what might happen in the southwest between Lib Dems and the Conservatives at the next general election. Somerset's a very good example of a very tight council, but Conservatives making headway in Devon as things stand at the moment. But really the councils to isolate are in the top left of the map here. Lancashire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, Staffordshire. These are the 4 Labour councils, only 4 that they are defending in these elections. And Derbyshire is the strongest. So to cut to the chase, if they lose Derbyshire, it's been a terrible, terrible election for them. They might lose all 4. What I can tell you at the moment is the Conservatives have gained 2 in Derbyshire, 2 council seats, 1 from Labour, 1 from the Lib Dem. And if we're looking at Staffordshire here, the Conservatives have gained 11 seats now in Staffordshire. It's been a Labour council since 1981. That's going to start worrying some Labour MPs. There are Labour MPs in Tamworth, in Burton, in Stafford. Bring the map up here. And these are the colours we left the map just before the voting in these local elections. Let's have a look at where the colours are now. Very early days because most of the counting happening today, so we haven't got very much, but we have got some clues. Hampshire stays Conservative down here. This is Central Bedfordshire here, one of the new unitary councils. There are 5 new unitaries: Bedford, Central Bedfordshire, Cornwall, Shropshire, Wiltshire. That stayed blue. It was theoretically blue before, but what's interesting, not a single Labour councillor elected in that new unitary council. If we look here, this is Bristol. It was no overall control. It's now gone Lib Dem. That's a great result for them. Very worrying for Labour here because Bristol sends 3 Labour MPs to Westminster. So take an example, one of them, Doug Naismith, 2,700 majority at the last general election in 2005. All 5 Labour councillors who stood in his parliamentary seat area of Bristol North West are gone. All 5. Similar story in Lincoln. Lincolnshire Council stays blue. In the middle of blue Lincoln blue Lincolnshire is red Lincoln, a Labour seat held by Labour's Gillian Merron. Solid majority, 3,800. What's happened there? 7 of the 10 council seats in Lincoln have gone from Labour to Conservative. So if you're Doug Naismith or Gillian Merron, you're starting to worry there. One small addition to point out with Lincoln, up here is the parliamentary seat of the Conservative who famously claimed expenses to get his moat cleaned, Douglas Hogg. He is standing down from Parliament. We gather, though, in the council ward, which is inside his parliamentary seat, there's been quite a sharp drift from Conservatives to Liberal Democrats. So lots of the map to colour in. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Well, we'll be joined in a moment by Nick Clegg, leader of the Liberal Democrats, but first Hilary Benn joins us from Westminster. Hilary Benn, the Environment Secretary. Good afternoon. You staying in your job?
Well, I'm very happy doing the job I'm doing at the moment. I think we'll just let the Prime Minister announce the makeup of the new cabinet. We won't have to wait very long.
Bit of a shambles, this reshuffle. Not quite what the Prime Minister wanted, is it?
Well, I don't agree. I mean, he's reshaping the government. He's getting on with the job of work in what has been, let's be honest, a pretty difficult week. But I think when all of the excitement and commotion of today has passed, we'll get back to the real choices we've got in British politics, which is about what policy you've got, what choices you make, whether you're on the side of people in tough times or not. And on that, Gordon Brown has been doing the right thing, and that's why I think he's the right person to lead the country going forward.
There seems to be a lot of discontent on Labour's backbenches, and we've been talking about the possibility that that's where the trouble will come for the Prime Minister now. I mean, despite these, this reshuffle of the Cabinet, if the election results that we are currently reporting prove bad for Labour, they will take fright.
Well, these always were going to be difficult elections for us. Some of the seats were last fought in 2005 when, as Jeremy Vine was just saying, we had the general election and that boosted our vote. I think one will also be looking to see what progress the Conservatives are making. And I think the European results will be different again. We're likely to see the smaller parties gaining on probably quite a low turnout. But look, in the end, this is a time when people have to stand up and be counted. And these are difficult times. That's not a moment to run away from the person who's giving leadership to the country and to our party. It's the time to get behind him and to support him. And that's what I'm doing. And I think that's what a lot of Labour Party members and Labour MPs will do.
12 percentage points down.
Well, they're very disappointing results. And I'm sorry for a lot of very good Labour councillors who will have lost their seats. But don't forget, David, the last European elections in 2004, Labour got, what, 22% of the vote? People said at the time, well, that's not a very good result. A year later, we won the general election for the third time. And if a week is a long time in politics, well, up to a year can be even longer. And I think when the excitement of the moment has passed, as I say, the next election will be about a choice. Life in politics is about the choices you make.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ben, you say a week's a long time in politics. I think a day's a long time in politics these days. Over in Bristol in a moment, we'll join the Liberal Democrat leader, Nick Clegg. The Bristol Unitary Authority has been taken by the Liberal Democrats. Just see what happened there. They needed 4 gains to get outright control. There's the result. Lib Dems on 36, up 4. The Conservatives up 4. Labour dropped 8 in Bristol. So we're joined by Nick Clegg. Now, Nick Clegg, first of all, it's conventional to say congratulations on the victory in Bristol. And I've said that. Now I want to turn to the results that we're getting through at the moment, which is a fall in the Liberal Democrat vote. We've had 170 of our key wards in. The Liberal Democrats are down 2 percentage points. Admittedly, Labour down 12, but the Tories are up 3, you're down 2. It's not a very pleasing picture, is it?
Well, you know, as I think Jeremy said, these aggregate figures now don't make a whole lot of sense because they're so partial. The picture that I'm getting is that we are having a disappointing time of it in parts of the southwest, Devon and Somerset, as far as I can make out from the early results. Spectacular gains against Labour here in Bristol. Spectacular gains against Labour in their northern heartlands. For instance, the 6 county seats in the Burnley area, we've taken 4 of them, and a surprisingly good set of gains against the Conservatives in the southeast.
You mentioned
2 gains in Eric Pickles' own seat, for instance, winning seats against the Conservatives in Eastbourne, and even in places like North Norfolk. So, like always the case with these elections, a bit of a patchwork, a bit of a setback in the southwest, but very significant gains elsewhere.
You mentioned Devon. You need to. The Tories have gained 6 seats there. There seems to be a swing of 5% at the moment from the Liberal Democrats to the Tories, which might give them the council.
Yes, it might do. This was always going to be a difficult fight for us because, of course, we have been, if you like, the incumbent party in that part of the country for a very long time. As it happens, they are extremely well-run councils, both Somerset and Devon. Devon we control outright. Somerset we've been running as a minority administration.
But Nick Clegg, isn't it a bit of a disappointment to you? I mean, you've made great play with being, you know, the party that is making the running here. Vince Cable, the only man... Well, hold on a second. Hold on. Vince Cable, the only man who understood what was going on in the economy. You, the only person who was quick to say we've got to clean up politics. You, the first person to say we've got to change the Constitution. And the net result appears to be that your vote has fallen.
Well, I really do think it's just simply... you know, sort of academic to talk about a net result when so few results are still in. As I say, I think the pattern is emerging from the information I've got, is that in places like Bristol, what is happening is a pattern which has been established for quite some time, which is in our big cities. Our big cities are being transformed from Labour cities into Liberal Democrat cities. Sheffield, Liverpool, Hull, Newcastle, now Bristol. That's an astonishing transformation in urban politics. You're right, in the rural parts of the southwest, where we have been strong in the past, there's clearly a strong challenge from the Conservatives, but in other parts of the country, we've actually been making gains against the Conservatives in the southeast, gains against Labour in the north. I think that's, what that tells you is that in keeping with the sort of patchwork of politics in the country at large, where Labour is doing badly in its heartlands, we are making all the running, the Conservatives are not. Where the Conservatives have traditionally been strong in the southeast, we've actually been making gains. Where we have traditionally been very strong in the rural southwest, we're clearly facing a challenge. That's the fairest assessment I can give you of how we're doing. As a whole, I think that paints a picture of real momentum for the Liberal Democrats.
Well, we shall see when all the results are in. I have to say that Professor John Curtis is fairly confident, I talked to him a moment ago about this, that the trend of things is fairly even and that therefore it may not change very much. But of course you could be right. There may be big surprises for the Liberal Democrats to come. Maybe your vote will go up. But at the moment it's as I described. Anyway, I hope we can join you again later on, Nick Clegg, when we've got our projected national share in, and then see whether you're still confidently smiling. Thank you for joining us. Thanks. Let's go to Preston now and find out what people on the street in Preston are saying. We join Regina Vaidyanathan.
Well, behind every vote is a view, and we're here in Preston's Market to try and gauge some of those opinions. Now, I'm joined by 4 working mums, Kathy, Fiona, Mila and Habiba. Start with you, Kathy. You normally always vote Labour.
Normally, always.
But you didn't yesterday?
No, I've no intention of voting ever again.
And why is that?
Just because of the expenses row and all that. Business is really, really quiet. It's been quiet for at least 4 months. It's getting worse. I'm just keeping my head above water at the minute. And when you read this about the politicians claiming all these expenses, it just seems to add insult to injury, and no, I'm not going to vote.
So you're not going to vote now? You didn't vote either, did you, Fiona? No, and you've never voted? No, I don't. What could the politicians do to try and make you vote? Anything?
Very similar. Well, it's trust, like a belief. Like I say, I'm a small business owner myself, and I'm bringing up a family as well, and it's nothing. The expenses has killed all of us, and like you say, we're just holding as it is.
So your biggest message would be to focus back on the economy?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, now you two as well, Mila and Habiba, are also small business owners. Let's start with you, Mila, then. You did vote, and you stuck with Labour this time.
Yes, the reason for that is simply because Gordon Brown, we're in a race, that we're halfway through it. We need to come out of the recession. There's no point starting again and going back to the start.
So you think he should stay as Prime Minister?
Absolutely, and he should be held accountable for what he's done. I mean, it's all right rocking the boat, Hazel Blaze and James Purnell. How dare they abandon them when we need them the most? I think they should come back and be made to walk the plank. Personally, never mind rocking the boat. As a small business owner, I can't quit. I have to carry on. Everybody I worked for in the past, Woolworths especially, have all gone bust. I can't go back to my old job. I have to make my business work.
Okay, just very quickly, final thought from you, Habiba. You're also running a small business. What would be your message to the politicians who are watching this?
Just to help the economy. You help the economy and you've sussed it, really. That's it, we've all got mortgages, we've all got young children that need to be looked after at the same time,
Okay, thanks, ladies. So it seems that a message here from Preston Market from these working mums is focus on the economy, and that's the message that they want to get through to the politicians.
Thanks, Regina. Well, we're joined now by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, William Hague. Good afternoon, Mr. Hague.
Good afternoon.
Houdini's done it again, hasn't he? I mean, James Purnell went and everybody said, well, that's the end for Brown. Not at all. He's reshuffled, he's started again, he's got his Chancellor in place. Government as usual.
Well, we'll see. It's not up to the Conservatives, up to the internal divisions of the Labour Party how these things work out. We would like to be rid of all of them, of course, and have a general election. But I think he's left with a very fragile and weakened cabinet and as a weakened Prime Minister, because he clearly hasn't been able to move ministers who he wanted to move. It's very evident he wanted the Chancellor out of that job, quite possibly that he wanted the Foreign Secretary out of his job, and he hasn't felt strong enough to move them. So he's left with them knowing that he wanted to move them, and it's a weakened team if it stays in office over the next few months.
What makes you think he wanted to move them?
Sorry, I couldn't
I said,
hear that.
what makes you think he did want to move them? I mean, that's just propaganda, isn't it?
Well, it is so. We don't know their internal dealings, but it is the way he spoke about the Chancellor, always in the past tense in the last week. And it is said that he offered him other jobs. And clearly, Ed Balls was keen to be Chancellor, Peter Mandelson to be Foreign Secretary. All of this was being teed up until recently. So I think it is a weakened and fragile cabinet, but more than that, a weakened Prime Minister. To have this steady departure of ministers, to have the timing of a reshuffle dictated to him by events and then the contents of it dictated by other ministers, is really not a Prime Minister in charge of events or his government anymore. So we need that general election.
So it's good luck for you, really, because you could have been landed with Alan Johnson, who everybody says will be a much more attractive leader of the Labour Party.
Well, we're ready for any of them. They are consumed by internal division. They suffer the problem of having an unelected Prime Minister who has no mandate from the country. It's probably not the solution to their problems to have a sequence of unelected Prime Ministers. The people of this country have been crying out in these elections for a general election. And that is what the Conservative Party is also campaigning for, and what I think the voters in the results coming in have shown that they want. It's a massive rejection of the Labour government.
And what would you call, on the results that we're dealing with this afternoon, the local election results, what would you call an endorsement of the Conservatives, sufficient to make you feel confident about winning the next election which you're talking about?
We never take the next election for granted. We're never overconfident about that, whatever the results. But clearly, we are doing very well here. We seem to have nearly twice as many votes as the Labour Party. We're now making very important gains in the West Country from the Liberal Democrats in Somerset, and it looks like in Devon as well. So we're winning in all parts of the country, in the north against Labour, in the southwest against the Liberal Democrats. We just take nothing for granted.
What kind of improvement would you want on the last time these council seats were fought? What sort of percentage should we be looking for?
Well, we've obviously wanted to gain more seats compared to before, and we're gaining a lot more seats compared to before.
I asked you about percentage.
Yes, the percentage.
Vote.
On the percentages, the percentage vote of all the main parties, I think, has been affected, first of all, by so many minor party candidates standing, nearly twice as many as before, and also by the expenses scandal that we've recognised throughout this campaign has hit all the main parties.
Right.
But the Conservative Party has come out streets ahead of that, not only in how to clear up the expenses scandal, but also in these results, far ahead of the other two main parties.
Thank you very much indeed, but we shall see how that pans out. Let's go back to Downing Street and join Nick Robinson. Nick.
Well, there are two key jobs that we still don't know how they're being filled here at Downing Street, David: health and defence. Now, the expectation was that Sean Woodward would be very likely to fill that job at defence. That hasn't been confirmed. There are even suggestions that the junior minister, the Minister of State there, Bob Ainsworth, may be moved up in the job, but I can't get either of those things confirmed. Health is also an important vacancy. The interesting question is whether Caroline Flint, a friend of Hazel Blair's, who was widely expected to resign either with her or the day after, who then endorsed Gordon Brown, and in her answers about why she was endorsing Gordon Brown, rather slipped on her words and said she was looking forward to serving in the government, giving away that maybe she had been promised a job around the cabinet table. Might she go to health? We're waiting for that level of detail at the moment from the Prime Minister's office. And I heard you ask there, William Hague, whether there was any evidence that the Prime Minister wanted to make a different sort of reshuffle. The truth is there is evidence, because senior advisers to the Prime Minister told me that he thought that Alistair Darling needed to move from being Chancellor. I'm absolutely clear that that was discussed. I'm clear that Mr Darling was sounded out about a move to the Home Office. I'm clear that James Pennell was sounded out about a move to education so that Mr Balls could go to the Treasury. It's always deniable in the end, David, because the Prime Minister doesn't have the conversation directly, so they can always say the Prime Minister never offered anything to anyone other than the jobs that have now been taken.
So, Nick, very briefly, this round-robin letter that may go, if you've got all this secret information, what chance do you think that has of getting off the ground? We only have a few moments.
I think it is now not off the ground. They're waiting and hoping that another bit of bad news will persuade people to sign it. Today, it seems to be ever so quiet.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've not had many results in. We've had 4 councils. We've got 30 to go, so stick with us while we give the results of these very important local elections, and particularly for our projected national share, showing how the 3 main parties are doing compared with what these were last fought 4 years ago. So needless to say, we'll be back with more this afternoon after the news at 1 o'clock. We'll be back here at 1:40, and I hope you'll join us again then. Thanks.